welcome to this week's episode for Ontario Landlords. We're going to talk about evictions, when, how, why, the misunderstandings of the process, and we're going to dive into it. Obviously, evictions is not a fun topic. It's not something that any landlord wants to have to deal with. So to avoid this, and to try to get it, it's about placing a tenant. We're going to get into that in another episode, the ways to do it, but it's not just about calling the references that they provide. It's more than just asking questions. There's due diligence that you must do. There's systems, tools, people like myself out there that can help you with this process. Evictions are not easy. They're not fun. Once a tenant is in, they're very hard to get out. And to talk about that process today, we're going to bring back one of our favorite guests, paralegal from Stonegate Legal Services, Mr. Robert Di Lisi. How are you doing today?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me on again. And this is going to be an exciting topic.
Sadly, I agree. It is exciting. It's something that, again, most landlords don't want to be in this situation. But if you are, there's ways to understand it or try to avoid it as well. So I guess let's start with the misunderstanding of it all, right? Like, that's something that I get questions a lot about. Or, can we just get this person out now? I just bought the house. I wanted my own tenant. Can I evict them? They're making a mess on the front lawn. Can I evict them? There's different things like this. So let's see. What are some of the questions, I guess, that you get as well when people are wanting to evict people?
Yeah, so people think that they can arbitrarily just evict someone. What you need to realize is that there is a process. This is Canada. There is a legal system in place. So if you want to evict, and the most common way would be for non-payment of rent, you can't just walk up to them and say, I want you to leave, or else I'm going to call the police. Police have nothing to do with this. If you call the police and tell them that you have a tenant not paying rent, they will tell you this is out of our jurisdiction. You need to go through the Landlord and Tenant Board. To go through the Landlord and Tenant Board, you now have to give a notice to the tenant, file an application to get to the board. You're looking probably at, I'm going to be a little dramatic, but let's say 6 to 8 months to get to the board, another 30 to 60 days to get the order, and then 3 to 6 weeks, depending where you are in the city, to actually have the sheriff come out. So I want to say there's only 3 ways to evict a tenant. Number 1 is when they give you notice, which is usually the N9. Number 2 is going to be a mutual agreement, which is the N11. And number 3 is the court order. The N9 and the N11, you can file for an ex parte order for the eviction. But most of the people watching here, if they are doing it for non-payment of rent, you have to wait for the court system, and then the sheriff is the one that does the eviction. The sheriff is the court-appointed officer for the court. They are not police. I want to make that very clear, okay?
So we have the 3 forms you just mentioned, Rob. The N9, which is where the tenant is saying they're leaving. The N11, which is where it's a mutual release. And then you also said the third one was when the sheriff comes to actually evict you at the end, the court order at the final process. But the N9 and the N11, what happens if they don't leave on those dates that they say they're going to because they just decide not to?
Right. So when they give you notice, which is the N9, or mutual agreement, the N11, instead of waiting 8 months or 6 months to get to the board to get an order, you are actually applying to the board to get an ex parte order. So when you have that ex parte order, and I'm going to make an example. So today is October 24th, and they say they're going to move out by the end of November. Well, if you file with the board to get that order, if they don't move out by the time that's on the N9 or the N11, that ex parte order can now be filed with the sheriff. So instead of waiting to get the order, you're getting the order right away because it's either on mutual agreement or they're giving you notice. So the eviction is still going to happen. It still has to happen through the sheriff. If you call the sheriff up and just say, my tenant's not paying rent, I need you to evict them, they're going to say, I can't do anything without a court order. I need the order from the Landlord and Tenant Board saying that they owe money. And then they start the process. And it usually takes about 3 to 6 weeks, depending on where you are in the city. For Toronto, I think it's up to 8 weeks. And what they'll do is they'll put something on your door saying, hey, just letting you know, we're coming in a couple of weeks to evict you. And the reason why they do that is they give them the opportunity to leave on their own. If they don't leave on their own, they show up and then they go through their process. And I don't know if you want me to elaborate. I can elaborate on that process.
No, yeah, I think that's really what it is. The sheriff's coming in now. We have somebody that actually has one of our properties for November 4th. That's when the sheriff is going to there, and I've spoken to this tenant many times, and she's ready to go, but she's waiting right until up until then to go.
Many of
Right,
them do that. Many of them do that. So if you don't mind, may I explain the process of
of
what will
course.
happen? Okay. So what the sheriff is going to do is they will show up. It's not a police car, it's a white car and it just says Ontario on the side. Usually it's two people. It could be male, female, two males, it doesn't matter. They're in uniform. They look like police, but it says Ontario or Provincial Services on the side. When they come to the property, they're going to knock on the door. If the tenant is there, they will say, we're here to evict this property. We will give you 15, 20 minutes to gather your things. You must leave the property. A lot of the times, the tenants know that the sheriff is coming because, like I said, they'll post something on the door before they come. So a lot of them have a bag ready to leave. Some of them are not always cooperative. So sometimes the sheriffs have to talk to them to have them get ready. It's very important that once the tenant is removed, the property goes back to the landlord. And I know that sounds crazy because, well, it's always belonged to the landlord. But in this case, you have to remember you're renting out the property. So now they'll put an order on the door saying that they've now guaranteed vacant possession. Usually the landlord will walk through the property to secure the property to make sure all the windows are locked, and you should be changing any locks such as the front door, back door, garage door, because there have been circumstances where the tenants come back and try to break into the property. And this is where it gets crazy, is that you can now call the police to have them charged with trespassing or removed. But depending on the police, we're having a problem where they do not do their job and they allow them to stay. So that means that you have to call back the sheriff for them to either come back out again or to inform the police to have these people removed. The reason why the police don't want to get involved is because it's not in their jurisdiction. They don't want to have the problems, especially if they have the recorders on their chest. When I deal with the Toronto police, they say, I'm not going to risk my job because everything's being recorded. So just know that even when you get an eviction, there are times where the tenants do come back. That's why it's extremely important that the landlord has a locksmith ready. Change all the locks. Don't cheap out. Don't think, oh, they're leaving, they're not going to come back. They sometimes do.
I think that's right. Be prepared, right, for the worst. Sadly, we're already in a bad situation, and we don't want that situation to get even worse. Um, so you mentioned at the beginning that the most common one is definitely non-payment of rent, as why people try to
Yeah.
evict here. So what are other reasons why people can evict? I can tell you reasons why some people ask me if they can evict people and want them out. But what are the reasons why we can actually?
The most common is the non-payment of rent. That is going to be the most common. The other one would be an N12. So that's if you want to move into the property yourself, or a buyer wants to move into the property and they don't move out. You go to the board. They will now issue an order that they have to leave. That is the second most common. In regards to, because you brought this up in the beginning, that there's garbage on the front lawn and stuff like that. So that would be something called an N5. However, an N5 is a behavioral application, so it doesn't always result in an eviction. It's rare because it's behavioral. Now, I'm being careful because this is being recorded, so I don't want to say with certainty that what will and will not happen. It's just from our experience that if you're trying to evict for garbage on the front lawn, it doesn't always result in an eviction. So mostly it's going to be your N4 or N8, which is a persistent late payment, if you can get an order on that, or the N12. Those are going to probably be, I'm going to say, the top three.
No, obviously with single family residents, right? When we're talking about garbage on the front lawn, that's behavioral that way. But what about if, let's say, I had a duplex or a multifamily property, and now the behavior is between tenants? Can I evict because someone is not getting along with another tenant?
Again, that's going to be behavioral. If you do an N5, the problem is again, you're still looking at 6 to 8 months to get to the board. Then the adjudicator will make that decision. From what we see, it's not, if it is going to be an eviction, it's not an immediate eviction. What they'll say is basically a slap on the wrist that they have to behave. If they don't behave, it could possibly turn into an eviction. It just depends on how the order is written up. And this is the problem with landlords, is that they're putting the responsibility on the landlord. The landlord's trying to do their duty as a landlord. They go through the process, but they can't get the person evicted. And I'm a landlord myself. I have these problems as well.
Yeah, no, it's over my years, I've been dealing with a lot of first-time investors as well, right? Helping people get into this, and this is a lot of the common questions we go with at the beginning. And a new landlord doesn't know all the ins and outs and what they can do, and a lot of them believe that we can get people out just because they're not being nice, not treating the property properly.
Yeah.
Just, that's my house, and now it looks bad. That's my house, and the backyard, the grass isn't getting cut. Well, actually, the grass is a responsibility to the landlord if it ever comes back to it, right? So we have all these things that we have to educate people on, which is why we want to do this video today. And like Rob said, these are general statements. These situations are specific, so if it ever does get to the board, which way they're going to go, everything is different. But we're trying to give you guys an idea about what is right, what is wrong, what can be done, what can't be done, so that you're understanding on a general basis. Obviously, anything specific, if you're ever needing a paralegal's help, reach out to Stonegate Legal Services. They only deal with landlord and tenant issues. They're not a paralegal that helps with all matters. And as Rob said, he's a landlord. He's been a landlord, I think, for over 20 years, if I'm correct there. And yeah. So this is a great source of information, a guy to go to who we were talking off camera, and he said he did over 200 evictions in the province last year. So we're understanding that he definitely knows what he's talking about. It's hard to get people out, like we said, right? This is not this is their home. This is where they live. They have to really be doing something horrible for the board to say, okay, you got to get out. So whether we want to do it, another one, actually, we'll go to this one before we get to, because this is really common. But about a renovation. I want to renovate my property. Can I kick them out so I can renovate it and then sell the Renovation? What about if I want to demolish the property? How does all that work if these things are going on, Rob?
So if you're demolishing, it's funny that you bring this up, because last night we were watching on City TV. They're talking about a new law that's going to be passed in Toronto about renovictions. I don't know if you've heard about the licensing. So things are changing. So if you try to do an N13, remember, it's still a process of going to the board. You need the permits, the plans, everything that you need. And then, unfortunately, it's the board that makes that determination. If the board deems that this is a proper N13, they will give an order for an eviction. So nothing is different. You're still waiting for the order. Then you have to go to the sheriff. The sheriff does their thing, and then they evict.
We went through that, actually. We had a client sell their property to a builder who was demolishing it, doing a joint venture, actually, is how they were going to do it, to build a multifamily on that property. And same thing happened. We went through it all. We did everything properly, all the plans, all the everything, and the tenant didn't leave by the proper date. So then we ended up doing an N11 and went through the whole rigmarole to get them out, and they ended up going through. I won't say the property, but obviously you guys helped our clients out with that one to make sure they got it all through. But yeah, this is the situation with evictions. Tenants have a lot of control, a lot of power. So when we're doing this, we need to make sure you're placing a tenant. It is a good tenant. You're doing all your due diligence, like we said at the beginning. This is the most important thing. I tell my clients all the time, it's better to have a month or two of vacancy at the beginning than it is to go through 6 to 10 months of BS at the end.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely.
It's they say hire slow, fire fast. Same thing with tenancy, right? We want to hire and look and be diligent when we're looking for somebody. Take your time. The first tenant isn't always the best tenant, and everything can be forged these days. So again, doing your due diligence, run license numbers, double check people. To prove a point, I had my buddy make me up a paycheck that I worked for the Toronto Blue Jays. Anything can be created if you're good enough on a computer these days. So as landlords, we need to be responsible. We need to either do our due diligence ourselves. If you don't have the time or the wherewithal or the confidence to do it, hire somebody and make sure it's done properly. This is one of the most important things about being a landlord is understanding who your tenants are and allowing them to enjoy your property to their full extent. We're running a little longer than we normally do here today. We want to make sure these episodes are full of information. So I know we've given you a lot there. Rob, if you have anything that you want to add on here before we stop with the topic of evictions until another day.
Just the last thing that you said is a lot of these problems can be avoided by qualifying, whether it's going to be through an agent or a property management company. They do have usually the skills to do this better than the landlord because they do it every day. But the key is to qualify the heck out of that person. Okay?
I agree. If they say you're asking them too many questions, there's a reason why, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, so that's awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Rob. I appreciate you as always.
No problem.
And landlords, we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.